In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to draw, color, and blend using colored pencils.
Because the tips of colored pencils are so small, they work best on smaller pieces of paper and if you have a very detailed drawing. If you have a bigger piece of the paper, you might want to use crayons or markers. So the first thing I want you to think of when you're using colored pencils is to press lightly. When you press lightly, or even with a medium lightness, you're going to get a lot smoother of a look. You're not going to get that waxy look that you often get with crayons unless you press hard. So when I'm pressing hard, I'm getting a very solid look, but it ends up looking a bit waxy. If you want to add details to your colored pencil and blend the colors, you cannot press hard. Look what happens. Say I want to add something on top, you can't see it. But when you add something on top and you've pressed lightly, you can see it. So keep that in mind whenever you're drawing. Another tip for colored pencils is let your hands do the work. So I call this little coloring. See how my wrist is pretty still? It's just my fingers that are moving. I have pretty good control of my colored pencils. But if you use your whole arm to color something this small, you're going to end up going out of the lines. Look, I don't have control when my arm is moving. It is completely colored in, but I end up going outside of the lines. So make sure you're only using your fingers and your wrist to color with. Another thing to keep in mind when you're using colored pencils is that if you make a mistake and you don't want to draw something, you cannot erase it. It will not erase no matter how hard you try. It might lighten it a little bit, but it's not going to be gone. So you have a few options to turn your oops into a beautiful oops. For one, if you are coloring lightly, you should be able to go over it pretty easy and turn it into something else. Another thing you can do is take a scrap piece of paper, cut it, and glue it on top of your mistake. If you notice and look very closely, I messed up when I was drawing this crayon, so I took another piece of paper and I just glued it on top of it. You will be able to notice it, but if you make a big mistake with the material that you can't erase, that is probably your best bet. So if you want to mix, you need to make sure you're pressing really lightly. Again, like up here I showed you, if you press too hard, you're not going to be able to mix. So I'm going to mix yellow and green. If you want to add more yellow, this looks a little bit too green, you just go back and keep adding more until you get the right shape that you want. When you're mixing colors, you have to be careful of which colors you mix. Think back to the color wheel. If you mix the primary colors all together, you're going to get a muddy brown color. So sometimes when we are mixing colors, we have to try to find colors that are close to the one we have. So if we try to mix green with red or red violet or orange, it's not going to turn out a pretty color. It's going to be like this muddy brown gray color. So I'll show you what that looks like. We have our green, and then we'll add some red in. And as I'm continuing to mix, you'll notice it's starting to get kind of a grayish brown color. It's actually called a chromatic gray. And it looks very muddy. You're better off mixing colors that are close to one another on the color wheel. So if I wanted to mix a purple, this is more of a lavender, with a shade of blue, it's not going to come up that dark, ugly gray-brown color. So just pay attention to what you're mixing and make sure you're getting the right colors. So I hope you have learned today how to use colored pencils.